Amen.
Well, welcome back, everyone. We have been chugging along to catch everyone up if some may have missed. We have gone through the creation story at the beginning of Genesis. We met Adam and Eve. We went through the fall of mankind as it is known colloquially. Adam's descendants, and we've seen just what a dysfunctional family can look like. Had a great discussion about the wickedness of humankind. And Noah, who is a man who walks with God, has been introduced. And now we're at Genesis 7. And we are going to find out about this flood. So a little background, what happened in 6? Little background, God tells Noah to build an ark, gives him amazing measurements about the size of 2 football fields, I believe, and maybe about 6 stories high. He's told to build this ark, make all these rooms for all of the beasts, including beasts of the air, and that they will come to him. And so let's read about the flood. Let's see, I will start out. Let's go Genesis 7, verse 1, and I'm going to read a nice big chunk so we can discuss from there. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and its mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and its mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the air also, male and female, to keep their kind alive on the face of the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Every living thing that I have made, I will blot out from the face of the ground." And Noah did all the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came on the earth. And Noah with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and everything that creeps the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 7th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah with his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and 3 wives of his sons entered the ark. And they and every wild animal of every kind, and all domestic animals of every kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every bird of every kind, every bird, every winged creature, they went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. Let's stop there briefly. Lot going on here.
Yeah.
Still, I must admit, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with what's going on here. There are inferences that people can draw from this, that God only cares to spare the elect, right?
Yeah, the pure animals, not the ones that are unclean.
Well, he did keep some of the unclean animals, but not as many of the unclean animals as the pure animals. Because I believe with the unclean animals, he wants just 2 and 2, 1 male and 1 female.
One pair.
But he took 7 of the clean animals.
Well,
What's the
later on,
definition of clean and unclean?
well, that comes later when they're the food rules, the ones
Yeah.
you can eat and the ones you can't
Right,
eat.
sure.
So I'm wondering
But
if
it's
they
not
needed
here.
more No, I know, but I'm wondering if the inference is they needed more of the clean ones because they're gonna eat some of them.
But it, most likely, you're right on that.
You're right.
But the dietary laws are come later in the Bible, but they may have been already present when Genesis was written and known to the Hebrews that were writing this.
I noticed a little clue on this. Let me find where it is. So essentially we get kind of rabbinic style. We get this
Yes.
story told twice, right?
Yeah.
It gets told once that Noah was 600 when these things happened. God told him to do these things. Then it gets
Right,
told
it gets
again
told
with a little
again.
more detail. And in the second detail, it says something of the nature that the animals, the clean animals were the domestic animals.
Okay,
So it would appear to me, and I need to find where that is because I was reading.
It's referenced on 7:15, and you and I had the same Bible, I think.
Yeah,
It says, it references
7:15.
Leviticus 11:1 through 47, and Deuteronomy 14:3 through 21, which I think are references to dietary laws that came into being in Abrahamic traditions, probably before Genesis was put in writing, but it would have been orally transmitted for some
Yeah.
time.
Verse 14. They and every wild animal of every kind, and all domestic animals of every kind.
oh,
And what I'm thinking there is a reference to farming, perhaps, animals that they were raising in pasture or something of that nature. And so you may be right that they needed those animals for food, and that's why there were more of them.
because there was another thing that occurred to me as we were reading this is, what are they gonna feed those animals? 40 days and 40 nights, and you would expect they would have to bring food.
Yeah,
But
they
that
don't
does
say-
say later to bring food
Okay.
no,
in this.
Well, I have a really interesting note that relates to our local history here. Lions and lambs, predators and prey set aside their natural enmity and lived together peacefully in the ark. Yeah, well, we hope. Only when the danger was over did they revert to their old habits. It will be a mark of the messianic age, and Isaiah, the peaceable kingdom quote, where traditional enemies learn to live cooperatively. And are you aware of the peaceable kingdom statue at the Madrona Library? Wow,
No.
you gotta go look at it.
Oh, wow.
Peaceable Wild Kingdom statue?
Well, yeah, it's on the corner of 34,
Yeah.
30
And
Third
Union.
and Union.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that statue is, it doesn't say that, but I know it's the peaceable kingdom. And one day I was looking closely at it. There's a pig in that group of animals. And nowhere is there a pig in Isaiah. Oh my God. And this is why it's so interesting, and it connects to our local history. What I read was the artist put the pig in to stand for the cops, and there's a black panther. Of course, since the whole statue was gray, we don't see that wild cat as a black panther, but the Black Panthers had their offices right near
there.
that
That's
corner,
right.
there. And so the peaceable kingdom, it's a metaphor for Madrona too.
Ah,
Alvin.
yes.
My footnote has an interesting comment here. It said the ceremonially unclean animals would only have to reproduce themselves after the flood, but ceremonially clean animals would be needed also to the burnt offering that Noah would sacrifice.
Oh,
And then, and it says see 8:20, but
Yes,
in
oh, we did
8:20, it's when he offered the clean animals. So that's when he needed more than, according to this.
Rosemary.
This is one of the first things that we've read so far that actually can be somewhat dated historically. Because in Mesopotamia, there was a great flood, and somewhere around 5000 BC, it can be carbon dated to. And the Egyptian calendar at the time, considering the dates and the years, the Egyptian calendar regulated by sun and moon, 360 days, 12 months of 30 days each. This is between 5000 and 4000 BC. But what I found interesting for you folks is that it is about this same time that the Inuits came across the Bering Strait.
oh.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
which I find very interesting, for you folks, because that's where, we have a lot of folks, indigenous people that actually made their way into the Americas, other than the Mayans, of course.
cataclysms create migration, right? And
yeah.
at a certain
Yes.
level,
So do we know
you know,
right now.
you can almost look at this story as a migration story. I mean, obviously the ark, changed the the perspective of where they were inhabiting. And so, yeah,
And
there's
our sea levels are very, very low because they think that the bridge that they took all the way down to North America or over there was is completely submerged. now.
yeah, yeah.
But I just thought it was interesting, you know, because it is one of the first things that we've read so far that actually can come to some sort of an actual date. Because, time, the way we construct time is a human construct. It has nothing to do with, with God's time, really.
Yeah.
Rosemary, what does carbon dated mean?
Andrew?
Yes, if you're using, like, if you take a rock, any rock, but particularly some specific rocks, and you put it through some testing procedures, carbon and has a half-life. And so if you go backwards, then you can consider the amount of carbon is actually in something. And then the half-life of that is can come to the date. I'm not explaining that exactly completely, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, they'll burn a fleck of some material to figure out how much carbon it's given off. And that'll give them a good guesstimate as to what date may be there. So that you'll find that with some ancient artifacts and things of that nature. They'll take a little inconspicuous piece to try and figure out how old it may be.
Yeah, the folks that have been looking for the Ark all these years have used that, particularly with the, the flooding in Mesopotamia and that area. And you're right, that means that a lot of folks had to move from where they were at.
Yeah. Let's continue. Verse 17 to the end of the chapter. Who's up for reading? It's a short passage. Let's see here.
I'll read.
Yeah,
I have a different translation.
but it's wonderful to hear.
The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and raised the ark so that it rose above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark drifted upon the waters. When the waters had swelled much more upon the earth, all the highest mountains everywhere under the sky were covered. 15 cubits higher did the waters swell, and as the mountains were covered, and all flesh that stirred on earth perished, birds, cattle, beasts, and all the things that swarmed upon the earth, and all mankind. All in whose nostrils was the merest breath of life, all that was on dry land died. All existence on earth was blotted out. Man, cattle, creeping things, and birds of the sky. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. And then it looks like the next sentence goes on into 8, but
Yeah. Oh, that's great that yours recognizes that there was a break put there, but that's not necessarily the way that it's supposed. I love that.
I love that.
One thing I always noticed as a kid, and it used to get me in trouble in Sunday school, is that God didn't kill the fish.
oh yeah, because they
Yeah. So there was no judgment
Good
on
for
the
you to
creatures of the
see
water.
that.
Yeah.
Good day for fish.
we kind of jump over that, but but that being said, this is an apocalypse. This is a terrifying and horrible thing to have witnessed. And I wonder about Noah's psyche and
Exactly.
where he would be emotionally after something like that, to see all that he's ever known, the land that he's ever known be wiped away, and then to be cast off somewhere else and not know where he's going or what of it, has to be terrifying. You know, and they were doing all of this in an ark. I'm sure it was, you know, you see modern like drawings of the ark or whatever, and there seems to be windows and it seems to be luxurious. But I'm sure it was not. you know,
No, God, just think of all those animals and all that crap that they would produce. I mean, what was that?
They're just bounding along on a sea. That's gotta be a terrifying,
Oh,
terrifying experience. Chapter 8. Al, if you wouldn't mind reading, let's read 8:1 to 12.
But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark. And he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heavens had been closed, and the rain had stopped falling from the sky. The water receded steadily from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the water had gone down. And on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month. And on the 5th day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. After 40 days, Noah opened a window he had made in the ark and sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find nowhere to perch because there was water over all the surface of the earth. So it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took the dove and brought it back to himself in the ark. He waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. When Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth, he waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again, but this time it did not return to him.
Trying to think, how many days were they actually in this ark?
it said, didn't it say 40 days and 40 nights? But
Yeah,
that was the rain that came
that was the
down.
rain.
There was more.
Then 150 days
Right.
until the water had abated. And then there's a period of 7 days before, once the water abated and the ark rested.
Well, there's the 40 days.
Yeah, so 40, that's 190, plus 7, that's 197. He sends out the dove, finds no place. Let's see here. So it's well over 200 days
Oh, long time.
trapped in the ark, which is astounding. It leaves me with several questions that aren't necessarily answered in scripture. Where they get water,
Yeah, where they get the water, great question.
potable water.
Rain.
Yeah,
Well,
Rainwater.
but the rain stopped after 40 days.
They probably kept collecting it.
That's
I
true.
don't know.
They
I
wanted to
think
be
this whole
alive.
thing's a myth and it's not history.
Accurate.
Those details weren't included.
I mean, granted, we are now reading this story thousands of years after it was recorded, which was thousands of years after it happened.
If it happened.
So, yeah, so I'm sure details are getting missed because, I mean, you know, stories from yesterday the details get questioned. We're watching congressional, you know, hearings in which details are being challenged about something that happened 2 years ago. So I'm sure that all of this passed down, you know, the details have gotten a little missed. I think what's more important for us to gather from all of this is devotion. Noah clearly was devoted to God and was clearly aware of God's presence being with him. To go through something like this and to come out on the other side of it would take, you know, a constitution I don't have. Any other thoughts?
But you have no choice.
Well, once you're in that ark, you definitely have.
You're gonna hang in there. Nothing else you can do.
No, but I mean, how they managed to do that without cracking up.
And have faith that it will receive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there are three metaphors that are worth looking at. The crow, the dove, and the olive leaf.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Now, my notes say that the raven represents an unclean species and the dove is a clean species. But it's interesting that even in ancient times that this was a symbol that perhaps, crows are still not liked.
Yeah.
In our day. And then also the whole idea of an olive leaf and how that's a symbol that has persisted.
yeah,
As an expression
sure.
that has lasted through the ages into to
Absolutely.
current language. Not exactly sure why they were chosen or why an unclean animal was sent first and then a clean animal.
yeah,
What were the authors thinking when they chose those?
yeah.
But there's a really cool note here about this olive leaf. It says, the olive tree, a sturdy evergreen, can live up to 1,000 years and is one of the earliest trees cultivated in the Near East. It's a short tree, indicating that the waters had diminished greatly. But the one I love is another interpretation. The dove bearing an olive branch in its beak has become a symbol of peaceful resolution of conflict. An olive branch, however, tastes bitter. Who thinks to taste it? It tastes bitter because this should warn us that although victory is sweet, it sows in the soul of the defeated the desire for revenge. So compromise would leave a bitter taste, promising an end to conflict. And how true that is even today.
Oh, boy.
Compromise, yeah, bitter taste for everybody involved.
Two sides to every story. also,
Right,
the-
well,
the
that someone
victor
would
and the
notice
loser.
the taste of the olive branch is bitter. No.
When I first moved to Los Angeles, I lived in a community called Sylmar. And Sylmar is essentially a slangified term that was given by the Spanish when they came, and they essentially there's a huge mountain range that abuts the San Fernando Valley. This is the neighborhood where they filmed the movie E.T. I used to get
Oh.
into trouble for playing in
Oh,
those
yeah.
woods right in the same neighborhood. So anyway, when the Spanish came, they overlooked this large valley and there were thousands and thousands of olive trees, and the
Oh.
back of olive leaves are silver.
Yeah,
And as
that's
it
right.
blows in the wind, it kind of looked like the sea. And so they called it the Silver Sea. And
Yeah,
that's the
Sylmar.
name of the community. But I got to know olive trees very well, and they are indeed quite bitter. They are smelly. But I'm sure that also in that, when the dove came back with the olive branch, there's a promise of food.
Yeah,
There's something is growing. There is
Yeah.
life on the ground that they can step out and put their feet down and know that there's something to sustain them there. And so that's meaningful as well. I think we take that modern sensibility of the olive branch and what it says about conflict and what it's come to mean within our culture. We take a lot from that, but also in there's this other part that, there's
well,
sustenance, there's something.
I've
sustainable.
never tasted olives right off the tree, but I think they're probably bitter too.
Oh,
wouldn't
yeah.
they be?
Oh, yeah.
I only get the kind in the jar that have been
You have a little
Yeah.
pickling.
pickled olives that are taste good.
Yeah. No, they can be. Sometimes though, they can be really rich if they've aged on the tree a little bit and gotten a little, gotten a little time to them, but anyway.
So I'm curious, when I look at the beginning of my book and I have the wonderful NIV study Bible, it talks about Genesis having a lot of repetition with many mythological constructs that have come way before. So how do you knit those things together? When you think this through and you think of these specific stories that are curated and put forth in this particular manner that take threads from a variety of different societies and cultural norms, how do you put that into context?
Well, so many cultures have a flood myth, right? So that leads scholars to believe that this obviously happened.
Mhm.
Something happened at
Something
some
happened.
point that was a part of shared cultural and shared cultural identity. Everyone can remember the flood. For the Jewish people, this is their story of how their people were sustained and survived that flood. But almost every cultural tradition, almost every religious background has a diluvian, a flood story.
Flood, do they
Right.
all have arcs? Or is
They
it-
don't all have arcs, you know, there's some other stories of people, you know, I've read some where people have hidden in caves. I've read some where people were just able to weather it. Or they were told to go to another land, and they went to another land and came back to discover that everyone had died in the flood. There's been all kinds of different stories there. Kitty, were you?
Yeah,
hand up?
I do just have a comment, and maybe everybody else is aware of this, but I believe there's serious archaeological evidence that there was indeed a huge flood. I don't know the date, but I believe it's supposed to coordinate with.
Yeah, there is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
This book here is 2001, and it says there isn't any evidence, but I know that
There
maybe
is.
after that time, they've looked at the bottom of the Black Sea, and there's entire cities,
Yeah.
the remains of entire cities that were there.
So I think with that, like we have a sense that these things happen. And so putting it in context, like when we talk about this hermeneutics thing, right? That you're dealing with the author who wrote it,
Mhm.
the text itself, what does the text actually say, and who was the intended audience?
Yeah,
The intended audience here were the Jewish people.
right.
And so with that, this is an origin story, if you will. Why are we set apart? Well, God had a special relationship
Yeah.
with one of our ancestors. And in that special relationship, God showed his preference for us, his desire to
Mhm.
save us from the flood, from the fire, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is another one of those things drawing back into the notion that we are to be a set apart people.
And I also liked what Mary Lee had to say in terms of these three different motifs and what that means for the intended audience and we can pull out.
Most definitely.
And
Most
I'm
definitely.
most entranced by the word ark, because later on, I was reading something in the book of Joshua. It's what they call the container for the stone tablets that Moses got.
Oh,
yeah.
It's Ark of the
Ark of the
Covenant, and then it was put into the temple. And today, if you go to synagogue, the Torah scrolls are in something called the Ark.
Yeah,
So that word has a
Well,
special meaning, I think.
yeah.
Container.
well,
definitely.
Sophie,
All right.
did you have something you wanted to say?
Hello?
Sophie?
Yes, hi. Yeah, in my Bible, they talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh and the fact that there is also a story there. And that's Mesopotamia, like, I don't know, 1000, 2000 BC. And they also have a boat that rests on a mountain, similar to this. And they also talk about the fact that the hero sends out two birds, a dove and a swallow, each of which come back. But the raven doesn't return. And what I was going to say is if we take this up a notch, to me, this story could be meaningful in many ways. You know, we all sort of have a moment or a part of our life when we're sort of effectively on an ark by ourselves. And, you know, if you want to sort of take this story to another level, that God is with us, I think that's it could be a positive story. I think we all tend to focus on those people left in the waters. But then if you think about the loving kindness of God for the folks that are in the ark, I think that could be good. I mean, we're living through a very hard time right now. I appreciated our new priest, our visiting priest, talking about that last week. We're in very difficult times. And so this story could actually be somewhat, I think, optimistic.
And that notion that the flood is relentless, that the aftermath of the flood is 3 times the actual event, right? It rained for 40 days, but you know, it was 150 days of waiting for it to clear. There was another, you know, before the boat even came to rest, there was another 150 days. There was
well,
several days of waiting for the earth to prove,
But
right?
still no food, so I don't think it's real.
But as a metaphor, it's powerful.
Right. It's a metaphor, not a real story.
I mean, there's fish, and these
true.
people are pretty much the survival kind of people. They're not office workers stranded in a boat. They have a lot of skills.
That's true. That's true.
I mean, if they
There
were
was
supposed
only
to have,
Noah and his wife and and 3 sons. It's not a lot. Yeah.
and if they have all these pairs of animals, I mean, I would have thought, okay, I need to eat, so I'm only gonna bring a few
Kill some of
extra.
those. Yeah.
Bring a few
I mean, there's
extra
a,
to eat.
yeah. But you know, there's something to the fish thing, you know, I maybe I wouldn't have gotten in trouble in Sunday school if I had noted that they probably did fish.
They
instead of
needed the
just-
fish to eat.
I like the concept that stability is not to be taken for granted. You know,
Oh, yeah.
all of us assume that life is gonna go on more or less as we have known it. And something cataclysmic can happen at any time.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
the psychological preparedness for
Excellent.
complete
Yeah,
unknown.
true.
Yeah, that is excellent.
Cataclysmic and outside of your control, you know.
Exactly.
But the fact that they say that Noah was 600 years old, well, draws into question their measurement of time in general.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Their instrument
This is
is
not real.
Yeah.
But I think it felt like a
It's a
lot.
long time.
Yeah.
I think it felt like
and
a long
everything
time.
else by 6. Maybe you come to something more understandable.
It's a double trinity, right?
There
666.
we
Oh,
go.
dear, that's not.
Excuse
All
me
right.
for interjecting something very earthy and not as high-minded as what you just said. I was reading ahead a little bit about the Lord smelling the soothing odor. And having been a farmer or living with Wayne and working the ground and having llamas with manure that helped us as we made a compost with manure and the greenery and water. I think that if Noah had brains, which obviously he did, he was still living, he must have shoveled the manure in a certain spot. And then when they got off the ark, then he can use that manure. And because there was an olive tree, there must have been other greenery still. And eventually he could have created a very fertile land. So I appreciate the fact that he might have planned ahead a little bit, and that I know he didn't have maybe the water catchment systems that we have at our farm that we use to water our trees. But again, I like to think that they, yes, found a way to save the water. So that's all I'm going to say. And that's very earthy, and maybe that's TMI.
Oh, no. And he had a team, right? He had his 3 boys, he had his
Yeah.
daughters-in-law,
Mhm.
you know,
Yep.
I'm sure.
So you all might go yuck, and the Lord saw that the soothing odor. And when I was with Wayne, he got me down on my hands and knees when I first connected with him. He said, smell the soil. And it was just dirt for me right at that time. And, and so for him, a good soil gave off a soothing odor. Anyway, that's enough. I love you all.
No.
I'm listening.
And I think back to the discernment and Sophie's comments and everybody's comments about how these are metaphors and these are kind of guidance points for us to move ahead. It's this redemption story. Redemption is difficult. It's a little bitter. You get a little bit of what you want, but not everything. It's hard. It's tears. It's shoveling the manure. I love that. That's a great visual there, Inez. So yeah, I think it plays right into all that we're hearing, that it's an optimist story, but not for the faint of heart. And earlier, you have to have faith. It's hard to walk in faith when fire and brimstone is coming, if you will. I mean, opposite what we have here, rain and water. But when you have all of these other elements coming around you, it is wonderful to take heart and to take faith and to step back and say, okay, trust in God. But work hard and be discerning.
Yeah. We should read on, because God makes a promise to Noah. We should get to that promise. Clip, I've not heard your wonderful and soothing voice. If you wouldn't mind reading verse 13 to the end of the chapter.
Sure.
Chapter would be wonderful.
13 to the end of the chapter. By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah had removed the covering from the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was dry. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. Then God said to Noah, come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so that they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number upon it. So Noah came out together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground and all the birds, everything that moves on the earth came out of the ark, one kind after another. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease.
As a kid,
That's the Noahic covenant, the first of the major covenants of the Old Testament.
yeah. As a kid, when I first heard this story, and of course it scared me, right? Because this could happen again. Getting to this part was the part that gave me some peace of mind. God said he wouldn't do it again. So
Well, we're testing that.
I think we do every day.
And we're not only testing it, but there are lots of preachers that are saying that it's God's wrath. Lots of preachers are saying it. Somebody was just asking me that at the gym. How is that? You know, like, they just heard on the radio, you know, and we're bringing it on ourselves and people are gonna starve and all this illness. It's because we're sinning and God is wrathful. I mean, that's, they were asking me, do you think that's right?
Yeah, they blame everything on God. That's why the insurance industry has acts of God.
Well, they're blaming everything on sin and displeasing God, you know.
Yeah, but
I
that makes God into a bad tempered.
It does, indeed.
I think that is a natural human thing to do.
Yes, I think it is.
I mean, even this story, you know, is an example of it. You know, we see this flood recorded in histories throughout many cultures. And several of them attributed to, you know, the wrath of
a deity,
right?
Although I think it's interesting that the Hebrews gave us the promise, interpreted the situation as, but God loves us. So this is where God started a covenant with us that he will never do this again. So they're actually using a cataclysmic natural event and turning it into, don't worry about it. God, he may have done it, if you want to believe he did it, because we're sinful and chaotic. Water was always used as a symbol of, turbulent water was used as a symbol of chaos, metaphorically. But God started a covenant of forgiveness and love right here. That is not the way a lot of other cultures interpret it. And it's not the way some preachers now are presenting it as we head into a tough time.
There's meat on the bone there as well, that, you know, and I talk about this all the time, that we are all of strong stock. That's something that we sometimes don't, you know, take a moment to really recognize that, you know, all of us in our family histories have some story of overcoming incredible hardship. In fact, it's the one thing that binds all Americans together. It doesn't matter where you're from, your people hopped on a boat or were forced on a boat at some point and got here and made a way for themselves. And we are here because of great strength of character, great strength of will, the human spirit, and in my faith tradition, the grace of God, right? And so out of that, I would believe for the intended readers of this text, this was written to encourage. We are the people that God chose to survive the flood. We have a great responsibility here on earth as this covenant lays forth. Thoughts?
I think this is one of the early commitments to humankind taking care of the earth. It's early earth care.
Yeah.
This whole story is shows a responsibility for perpetuating that belongs in human hands.
God didn't completely destroy the earth. According to this, it's a reset. Hit the reset button. But he didn't do so completely. He left a remnant, and those people he made a commitment to. And so what's interesting as we move forward is we'll see the way that we don't always live up to our end of the bargain. For the sake of continuity, there's a very big story coming right after this. So what I would like to do is just read halfway through chapter 9 here, because it's a restating, that rabbinic tradition, you say it twice. It's a restating of God's covenant with a little fuller picture. We'll discuss that a little bit and pray and get on our way so that we can get to more of the story of dysfunctional families, which I think is really kind of, sidebar, really kind of at the heart of the Genesis story.
Yes,
There's every
dysfunctional family.
every color of dysfunctional family. And I went through a quarrelsome experience growing up with my family. Genesis gave me a lot of hope. So don't know what all of you are going through, but I'm sure that your families are all perfect and you don't need this message. But I'm anxious to get there because there's a lot to discuss. So I'll read out halfway through 9 here. So Genesis 9. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth, on every bird of the air, and on everything that creeps of the ground, and on all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life that is its blood. For your own lifeblood, I will surely require a reckoning. From every animal, I will require it. And from human beings, each one, for the blood of another, I will require a reckoning for human life. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human, shall that person's blood be shed. For in his own image, God made humankind. And you be fruitful and multiply around on the earth, and multiply in it. God said to Noah and to his sons with him, as for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I will establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. I will bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds. I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it. Remember the everlasting covenant between God and every creature and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all the flesh that is on the earth. Rainbows.
Rainbows, that's a nice way.
Rainbows. I remember explaining to my son when he was very young, just a little bit of this story, and explaining what are the rainbows. He saw a rainbow. What is that, Dad? And I explained to him that, that is a sign that God won't let the rain just rain on us forever. It's a nice thing,
Good.
And, he kind of smiled about it. He was like, so the rainbows come after it rains. I'm like, yes, and that's the whole deal. It's a beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
way of expressing it.
It is.
Anyone else see anything else there?
Well, again, from Jewish tradition, the thing about eating the flesh and not the blood, I remember doing a Bible study and my mother-in-law was visiting and she saw something like that in the scripture and said, oh, that's why my mother-in-law drained all the blood out of the chicken or whatever before she cooked it. And what I remember is my father-in-law was aghast at how I ate meat. I still eat beef really, really rare. He would look at it and says, oh my God, it's bloody.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't think of eating roast beef well done or a steak or anything. So it's a cultural thing that comes from those rules.
Well, in a community without, fancy temperature gauges, I'm sure it's really hard to ensure food safety. But one way to do it is to make sure that you drain all of the fluids and that you, cook it to death.
Cook it to death. That's
And
true.
so-
Cook it to death.
And so I'm sure there's something to that, seafood, one oyster that's bad can do you in, right? So one way to avoid it is to avoid it altogether, right? So,
Yeah, although colder climates have people that eat blood.
Yeah.
And it's helpful to them because blood contains vitamins from plants, like
Mhm.
seed plants and things, that the animals have eaten. And they need those vitamins, and that's the only way they're gonna get it in a very long winter.
there's
Well-
also that element of being set apart that we were talking about, right? So,
Yeah.
so doing something that marks the cultural difference in the way that you celebrate.
It's so interesting. So we had these friends up in Boston who, when we went to visit them with my daughter, when she was a baby, they kept a kosher house. He had to come out to the car and make sure the baby food we brought in their house had to have a little mark to say it was kosher. Otherwise, we had to keep it in the car. But that same couple, years later, we all went out to dinner with my parents to a seafood restaurant and she ate lobster. I said, oh, that's not kosher. And what she said was, well, we keep a kosher home, but when we go out, we can eat whatever we want. Everybody has a way of adapting.
Wow, that's so funny.
I just never forgot that. It's about your way of life, your home, and when you travel, it can be different for some people. That's
Yeah.
just,
That's funny.
yeah, I never forgot it. It was so funny.
I see in here in the restating of the covenant, elements of all of the promises given to humankind earlier in Genesis. So from Genesis 1 and 2, the plants are yours, the animals are yours to care for. This earth is in your hands. Specific attention to the prohibition on murder. Remember, there was something going on there where from Cain and Abel, and then on forward, there were these events happening. And so God once again, reiterates that I made humankind in my image, and I do not wish to see anyone destroy it. Be fruitful and multiply, that kind of takes care of itself.
Well,
But
then, I guess the only thing that troubles me is the language that follows that the fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the air. I like your gloss on it, which is we should care, right? I mean, we want to use this as creation care story, we do. The language is a bit troubling though.
You know, I like to look at that what that brings to mind for me. My son is deathly afraid of dogs. He just is, you know, and rightfully so. It's an innate thing. And I always remind him they are much more afraid of you than you are of them in many, many ways. And you need to understand that they are a dog, you are a person, and God has given you the ability to tell the dogs what to do. And so I kind of gloss it that way.
I'm also noticing that right after that, it leads into, but don't kill human beings.
Yeah.
There's a prohibition against
Yeah.
killing human beings here. And so animals can be afraid of you, but when you kill a human being, you're going to lose your own blood on that.
Yeah.
Because they are made in my image and I don't want you to do it. So it could be just setting up the contrast and like a hierarchy of, you know, go ahead and kill animals and eat them, but leave human beings alone.
And we saw in the story of the fall, Eve interacting with the serpent casually.
Yeah,
And as a part of the curse to the serpent, there was the explanation that there will be enmity between you and and their descendants, right? And so this notion that there is something broken between humanity and the animal kingdom, there's something there. There's something there.
and there's also something where people responded to cataclysms by offering human sacrifice. And this is another thing, like, no, I mean, that they're made in my image. You don't have a right to kill somebody because you don't want another cataclysm. I mean, and human sacrifice really did
Yeah.
die out. I mean, it really stopped in the Middle East and continued. It
Well,
continued
we're
lots
so
of other
glad.
places.
Yeah.
Murder didn't stop,
Yeah.
but I'm saying as a ritual to please an angry God,
Say,
okay.
please, deity.
human sacrifice did not occur at the rate. And it ended much, much sooner in terms of millennia than it did in other parts
Yeah,
of
in
the
other
world.
parts of the world, yeah.
Well,
I
I
support
find
that.
something here that, okay, what?
I said, I support that.
I find something here that's wonderful. There is a tradition, they say, the sages say, whenever you see a rainbow, you say a blessing. The rainbow blessing is, praised are you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who remembers the covenant, is faithful to it, and keeps promises.
Oh, I love that.
Oh my gosh, I need to
love
find
that.
that.
Say a
Wait one
blessing
second.
whenever you see a rainbow.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, one
Wait,
moment.
can you
That's not
send
in
it
there.
around or can you send it to? Ellen?
Yeah,
You can-
but I'm gonna,
What?
That little thing, can you type it up?
Type it up
Take a
and-
picture of it?
Give it to Ellen.
Take a picture? No, but I
Or
could
take a
email it.
picture.
oh,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't have a way to take a picture. I'm old school, but I could type it up and send it in email.
Sure.
The blessing.
I can take a picture and.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
I don't have that kind of phone.
But you know, typing is,
awesome.
No, I don't have a problem with it. I touch type. I have a regular keyboard. I could type a whole page and no problem. Anyway, you
I
take a
think-
picture.
I think this is a good place for us to stop because next week, as I gave a spoiler alert, we're gonna get to a little bit of Noah's dysfunctional
So
family,
it is. It's,
and then we'll move on from there.
well. no,
So,
it's,
if you guys
no,
wanna take a
not
moment,
there.
let's
I
pray.
have to get it over. Okay.
Creator, we are so incredibly grateful for the blessing and promise of life and life more abundantly that you offer to all your people, to all flesh. I pray that you continue to pour out your spirit upon us, make us a blessing to the world around us, and continue to bless our congregation as we study, grow, and live together in you. In Jesus' name.
And
Amen.
I